The Crisis Plan, written by Holly Walsh, read by Catherine Parkinson.
Most people in Basildon had no idea they were living on a major geological fault line. It's the sort of thing the council like to keep hush-hush. Possible earthquakes tend to drive down house prices, and the last thing Basildon needed was another reason not to move there. So when the earthquake struck, it came as a bit of a nasty surprise, especially for the workers of Tripeg Plastics, whose HQ happened to sit slap bang on the epicentre. With a tremor registering 6.2 on the Richter scale, the whole building crumpled like a pissed game of Jenga. There were only 6 survivors, 5/6 of the pensions and payroll team. Fat Nicola, the 6th member, was presumed dead after nipping to Costa just as the earthquake hit. And Mr. Decker, an exec from the top floor, who popped down to their basement office with some big news. Rumour had it that the big news was a promotion opportunity for someone, but this was somewhat upstaged by the entire building caving in above their heads. Talk about a bad day to bury good news. And so, Mr. Decker and the pensions and payroll team set about staying alive. Day 1 was spent spitting dust and generally freaking out. Day 2 was about trying to stay calm, rationing the water cooler and working out where to take a shit. Days 3 and 4 involved a bit more crying and several games of charades, whilst day 5 was mainly taken up finding alternative food sources, such as shaking crumbs out of keyboards and experiments eating coconut lip balm. By day 8, the novelty of an earthquake in Essex had worn off. The panic began to subside a bit, and the hunger and boredom really set in. Midway through day 9, Craig, the office temp, had an idea. Sticking together sheets of printer paper, he drew an enormous pizza with Sharpies and highlighters. Paper is filling, he reckoned. He'd read Supermodel's 8 loo roll to fill them up, so he cut the paper pizza into sections and handed it around the room, deliberately saving the biggest slice for Mr. Decker. You see, Craig wasn't stupid. If there was one thing he remembered from The Apprentice, it was that any situation is a potential employment opportunity. Maybe that's what Mr. Decker had popped down to their office for, he thought. To offer him a permanent position. Samira, the payroll officer, stood by the water cooler. She took a little battered pyramidal paper cup and poured her half share of water. She paused for a moment, then handed the other half share to Mr. Decker. It's worth the sacrifice, she figured. When they got out of that basement, she wanted him to remember her generosity. That's how you climb the ladder. Across the room, Lucas, the bookkeeper, watched Samira like a hawk. He'd probably sweated that amount of liquid out of one armpit today. He'd shifted uncomfortably on an upturned waste paper bin. He'd offered Mr. Decker his ergonomic desk chair out of calculated courtesy. He was hot and hungry and gasping for a fag. This was no place for a big man with IBS. Over by the door, Nigel, the departmental manager, with the help of Marta, a payroll assistant, rifled through Fat Nicola's desk looking for her biscuits. No one liked Fat Nicola. She clipped her nails in the office and gave shit Secret Santas. Last year, she'd given Lucas a strawberry bath bomb, knowing full well Lucas was allergic to fruit. Nigel could have sworn he saw Bourbons on her desk just before the quake, and finding them would really impress Mr. Decker. He'd been praying for this promotion for years. This was Nigel's chance to move up to the first floor. Not literally, obviously, that was now rubble. By the 10th day, the team began to quietly panic again. What if they've forgotten we're here? Thought Samira. What if there's been a zombie apocalypse? Thought Craig. I hope we get overtime, thought Lucas. On the morning of the 11th day, Mr. Decker took to the floor. As the most senior person in the room, it was time to take charge. Things were reaching breaking point. Marta had woken up in the night screaming, and Craig had almost OD'd on hole punch circles. Mr. Decker wheeled out the flip chart from the corner of the room. On the first page of the pad were scrawled 2 words. Crisis plan. Mr. Decker began. Right, let's get this over and done with. Everyone looked up. He flipped the page over to reveal a list of survival ideas. Most of them, like burrowing through to the vending machine, had been aborted. They had run out of ideas. It's time we address the fact we're all going to die here. Samira's head dropped. Craig stopped playing with his tie. There is one last thing we can do, continued Mr. Decker. He flipped over the page and wrote 2 more words. Eat someone. The room stared at it in the half-light. No one said a word. So, here's what's going to happen. Everyone will have their chance to say why they shouldn't be eaten, then we'll cast a vote, capiche? Okay. Guess this is what it's come to. There wasn't one person on the team who didn't wish Fat Nicola was there now. People had wanted to finish her off for years, and not in a sexy way. And so, as instructed by Mr. Decker, they each presented their case for why they shouldn't be chomped. Excuses ranged from, I have 3 kids and my blood type is rare, right through to, I've just renewed my annual Zone 1 to 6 travel card and it can't be refunded. What was weird, though, was just how many of the excuses were office-based. You see, everyone in that room knew this wasn't just a life or death situation. It was also a job interview, with them all vying for Mr. Decker's possible promotion. Thus, reasons to not be eaten quickly became about office seniority and who knew how to unjam the photocopier. Samira argued that, A, she was the only one who knew how to reboot the server, and also B, her rationing of the water cooler showcased her ability to economise. Craig posited that, although only a temp, he'd brokered a discount on a Viking stationery order, and that the paper pizza idea had demonstrated his aptitude for problem-solving. Meanwhile, Lucas stated that, as the only one who was abreast with the recent tax and VAT changes after having attended a course in Leatherhead, it would be churlish to eat him, and that his bowel control these last few days had shown him yet again going above and beyond for the sake of the company. It was then that the gloves came off. Things got personal. Nigel started it. Maybe we should eat Lucas. After all, he would last the longest. We don't want to do that, wheezed Lucas defensively. I'm a heavy smoker. You cut me open and I'm basically a chicken Kiev of tar. Marta agreed with Lucas. She couldn't live with herself knowing that Lucas was, in some way, inside her. She'd spent every office party trying to stop that from happening. Marta suggested that maybe Nigel should get eaten. As departmental manager, he might want to consider taking one for the team. Nigel was outraged. Where was Marta's loyalty? And to think he'd let her have some of his posh Millicano coffee last week. What a bitch. The room descended into a slanging match. And as all this happened around him, Mr. Decker just sat there. He knew full well he was untouchable. After all, there's no quicker way to be passed over for promotion than to suggest your boss be eaten. All right, shouted Mr. Decker eventually. I think we've all said our piece. I'm really hungry. Craig, hand out the paper. Let's have the ballot. Craig did as he was told, though it was quite hard to find paper, as they'd eaten most of it making pizzas. He eventually found a red folder stashed under a suit jacket. Samira was the first to turn her paper over. Why have I got a redundancy agreement with Marta's name on it? Samira asked, more to herself than anyone in the room. A little confused, the others flipped over their papers. In the dim light, they too could see what they were holding. Full redundancy letters, each with another colleague's name. Due to a combination of weakness and hunger, it took them a few seconds to register what was happening. Then the penny dropped. Oh, my God, the room thought. We were about to get sacked. Over in the corner, Decker sat incredibly still. This was his big news, though he'd hoped it had been brushed under the carpet. The whole accounts department was being moved to the Cardiff office. The Basildon payroll and pensions team were about to be streamlined out of existence. Okay, before you overreact, said Decker nervously. Overreact? said Nigel, spitting with rage. "You came down here to sack us all, you piece of shit."
"Yeah, you piece of shit,"
chimed in Craig. Seemed okay to say that now the departmental manager had. In my defence, Decker spluttered, "you failed to meet efficiency targets. Your company-wide interface aptitude sucks. And just look at you now. Your teamwork skills are atrocious." Mr. Decker immediately regretted opening his mouth. They didn't need a ballot. Decker was lunch. Decker lay on the desk. They tied his limbs down with telephone cables and Nigel's tie. Someone had written lunch with a Sharpie on his forehead. Decker was so weak with hunger he could barely move. Craig sharpened some scissors on a brick. The suspense was horrible. You could almost hear the concrete dust settle. It was then that the sound of munching started. Very faintly at first. It seemed to be coming from the empty storage cupboard. Sitting there was Fat Nicola. It wasn't fair to call her Fat Nicola now, though, as she'd clearly lost a stone or more from being trapped in a cupboard for a week. She'd shut herself in there from the corridor entrance just as the quake hit. At first, she thought she'd join the others, then she remembered her biscuits. There was no way she'd share them. So she crept out on the first night, while everyone was asleep, and stole them back to her cupboard. "It's dog eats biscuits when it comes to survival," she said. That's not how she phrased it, though. She told them all to go fuck themselves. Nigel demanded that she hand over the last of the biscuits. Fat Nicola stuck to her go fuck yourself guns. Lucas tried to prise them off her. Fat Nicola was having none of it. She hated that team, and there was no way they were getting her Bourbons, so she stuffed them in her mouth. Every single last one of them. In doing so, one got lodged in her throat. Properly wedged. And without air or any water to wash it down, she choked to death. There and then, on the dusty office floor. So now they had a dead Fat Nicola. That solved the who to eat problem. Decker was almost sick with relief. 3 days later, halfway through Fat Nicola, a hole appeared in the ceiling, followed by a torch beam. It was a rescue team, who were as surprised to find survivors as the survivors were to be saved. During the last hour, when it looked like things were going to work out, Decker spoke up. He'd been very quiet these last few days, ever since the whole redundancy fiasco, but now, while they were still together, he wanted to clear the air. He said he wished them well and would give them personal references to find other jobs. No one said a word. Then Craig spoke up. "Thank you, Decker, but there won't be any redundancies. Not after what happened down here. Not after what we saw you do to Fat Nicola." Decker looked confused. "Yes," said Nigel. "You've got 5 witnesses here, all of which saw you." "Saw me what?" said Decker, half laughing out of nerves. "Saw you strangle Fat Nicola." It took Decker an awkwardly long time for the penny to drop. It seemed he had grossly underestimated the aptitude of the payroll team. "As far as we're all concerned, we watched you wring her neck with your own hands," said Martha. Craig continued, really milking the power he had over this prick from management. "It's your word against ours. As long as we have a job and a pay rise and an espresso machine, then it's all going to be just fine." Decker nodded. He cheated death twice. He didn't want to die in jail. "Funny, really," said Nigel. "I guess we are good at teamwork." And so, in a way, everything worked out for the best. Well, maybe not for Fat Nicola, though she was awarded a posthumous Employee of the Month by head office. I guess the moral of this story is, make yourself indispensable. Don't lose hope. And never hog the biscuits. Oh, and if someone in your office brings in donuts on a Friday, remember, they're just trying to feed you up. Bye.